It was the kind of morning that seemed utterly ordinary, the sort of morning that years later you'd give anything to return to, just to understand what went wrong, to change it, somehow. But there's no going back. Only questions. Endless questions. September 12, 2014. A bright, cool Friday morning in the quiet, wooded town of Kendal, on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, Australia. A town known for little more than its lush greenery, winding roads, and serene stillness. At the center of this story is a little boy, William Tyrrell, just 3 years old. He had arrived the day before with his foster family. The trip was meant to be a short break, a getaway, a visit to see his foster grandmother, who lived on Benaroon Drive, a peaceful cul-de-sac nestled against a thick wall of bushland. They were a close-knit family, loving by all reports. William wasn't their biological child, but you wouldn't have known it. He had been placed with them under the care of New South Wales Family and Community Services, part of the long-standing foster care system. It was, in theory, a stable and secure environment, but it would soon become the center of one of Australia's most haunting unsolved cases. That morning, William had woken up early, excited, bubbly, full of energy, as most children are when they're away from home, somewhere new. He had breakfast with his foster family and then put on his favorite outfit, a Spider-Man costume, a bright red top, complete with the iconic webbing design, and blue pants. It was a detail that would become forever etched into the Australian psyche, because it was the last outfit he was ever seen in. At around 9:00 a.m., the family was settling into the day. William was playing with his 5-year-old foster sister outside in the front and side yard of the home. The adults, his foster mother and grandmother, were drinking tea nearby, keeping a watchful eye. The driveway curved, the property partially obscured by bush and garden. It wasn't an unfenced area, but it had enough coverage that children could dart in and out of view. Still, it felt safe. It felt normal. Sometime between 10 and 10:30 a.m., William was pretending to be Spider-Man, making roaring sounds, the kind of dramatic, joyful play only a toddler can pull off with such conviction. His foster mother remembered hearing him imitate a tiger's roar just moments before, and then, silence. A sudden, eerie, inexplicable silence. She stood up, called his name. No response. She called again, walked around. Still nothing. Within minutes, panic set in. His foster father, who had briefly gone to nearby Lakewood to make a business call and pick up a prescription, rushed back as soon as he got the call. In the meantime, William's foster mother searched frantically around the property. She knocked on neighbors' doors, peered into bushes, and walked the winding street, a street where barely a car passed that morning. By 10:56 a.m., she dialed 000, Australia's emergency services. The call was brief but tense. "I can't find my 3-year-old. He's been missing for about 15 to 20 minutes. He was playing outside and he just disappeared," she told the operator. Police responded quickly. Within the hour, local officers from Laurieton and Port Macquarie descended upon the scene. Volunteers and neighbors joined. Everyone thought, hoped, it was a simple case of a child wandering off, but they would be proven wrong. The initial search spanned hundreds of meters through thick bushland surrounding Benaroon Drive. Locals shouted his name, combed through creeks and trails, called out to birds in case he had been following animals. Drones hadn't yet become widespread, but helicopters flew overhead. Infrared sensors were deployed. Even the state emergency service, rural fire service, and the dog squad arrived. It was a full-blown operation. By nightfall, there was no trace, not a shoe, not a footprint, not a shred of clothing, and not a sound. As the hours passed, hope began to dim. Police began entertaining the unthinkable. Abduction. The location didn't help. Benaroon Drive wasn't visible from the main road, but it wasn't completely isolated either. It led into the dense forest, yet was still part of a broader community grid. There were ways in and ways out, quietly, quickly, unseen. By day 2, the New South Wales Police Force escalated the investigation to involve homicide detectives from the State Crime Command. Still, they didn't publicize that shift. Instead, they kept the narrative to the public focused on a missing child case to avoid panic. But internally, the tone had changed. Investigators began combing through every detail of the day, what cars had passed through, what neighbors had seen, whether anyone had knocked at the door. There was an elderly couple across the road, a family nearby. One resident had security footage showing a few passing cars earlier that morning, but nothing unusual. Nothing clearly suspicious. Yet suspicion remained thick in the air. The media got wind of the case by September 13th. Posters went up, newspapers printed his photo, and that photo, of William grinning in his Spider-Man suit, his tiny hands in mid-play, his mouth wide in laughter, became iconic. It was on front pages, posters, bus stops, and news segments across the nation. People across Australia wept for a boy they never knew, a child whose innocence was palpable in that frozen image, a symbol of a broken moment in time. And then, a layer of complexity most cases don't have. William's identity was subject to a suppression order. Because he was in out-of-home care, legally under the guardianship of the state, media could not name his foster parents or refer to his placement. This limitation, enforced under the Nest on Children and Young Persons Care and Protection Act, was meant to protect his privacy, but it also stifled parts of the investigation. For the first year, the public was unaware that William wasn't living with his biological parents. This wasn't out of deception, it was law. It created gaps, theories, rumors, misunderstandings. Some suspected the biological family, others turned attention to the foster family, and still others suspected an opportunistic predator had spotted William playing and acted within minutes. Police held a press conference soon after. They asked for anyone with dashcam footage from that day to come forward. They began tracking down registered sex offenders in the region. More than 40 individuals were questioned in the first month. Some had alibis. Some were ruled out entirely. Others remained persons of interest, a term that would be used repeatedly over the years without resolution. By the end of the first week, more than 200 police and volunteers had joined the search. Sniffer dogs, thermal imaging, divers in nearby dams, and mounted officers were deployed. Not a single credible lead emerged. No witness had seen William leave. No sound of a car. No scream. No sign of struggle. He was simply gone. And with that, the silence returned. The kind of silence that settles in when answers don't come, when every path leads nowhere. For the foster family, the impact was devastating. Interviews with them would reveal, years later, the anguish and guilt they carried. They had done everything right, by the book, and yet something still had slipped through. The biological family, meanwhile, faced their own pain. They hadn't seen William for months, their contact restricted under the terms of the care order. They learned of his disappearance through authorities. Their grief, though different in texture, was just as raw. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. The search continued, albeit at a slower pace. Posters faded, news cycles shifted, but the community of Kendall, and the wider Australian public, never truly moved on, because a child had vanished, in daylight, without warning, without a trace, and somewhere, someone knew why. Silence had taken hold of Kendall. In the days and weeks following William Tyrrell's disappearance, the world that once seemed secure and simple for this small Australian town had been fundamentally shaken. Search crews no longer flooded the woods in high-visibility vests. The helicopters were grounded, the search dogs rested, but inside every home, every cafe, every post office queue, the question lingered, quiet and unrelenting. How does a 3-year-old vanish without a trace? Behind the public-facing media campaign, the New South Wales police force was facing one of the most complex and emotionally charged investigations in modern Australian history. The task force, quickly designated Strike Force Roseanne, was formed to address one central goal: find William. It would eventually become one of the largest investigations in the state's history, absorbing more than $1 million in resources, thousands of man-hours, and almost every investigative tool the state had to offer. And yet, no body, no confirmed sighting, no physical evidence. The forest, so dense and unforgiving in parts, had failed to yield a single definitive clue. Theories started multiplying like wild vines. Was it a random abduction? Was someone watching from the trees that morning? Did a neighbor, a passerby, a tradesman, anyone, see something that went unreported? Or was it something more planned, more personal, a targeted act of harm? Could the motive lie within the realm of family, even foster care? Police interviewed more than 600 people over the next year. Some were known to authorities, including those on the sex offenders register. Each name was cross-referenced, their alibis tested against time logs, surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and phone data. Investigators reviewed call records of mobile devices in the area that morning. They created movement grids, trying to triangulate possible exits and vehicle movements near Benaroon Drive during the critical window between 10 GAG and 10:30 a.m., but they found nothing that could be proven, only shadows. Meanwhile, the tight restrictions on what could be said publicly continued to hamper community understanding. Because William was under the protection of the state, it was illegal to identify him as a foster child. That distinction mattered, not for assigning blame but for understanding context, for grasping who had access to William, who had contact, who might have had motive. The public narrative was by necessity incomplete. Even journalists, seasoned in covering delicate matters, found themselves bound by the legal muzzle. To breach suppression orders could mean contempt of court, fines, imprisonment. But this also created an invisible barrier between what investigators were exploring and what the public was able to comprehend. For over a year, Australians were searching for a boy without understanding that the people he lived with weren't his birth parents. In June 2015, 9 months after the disappearance, then New South Wales Premier Mike Baird increased the reward for information leading to William's recovery to $1 million, the largest reward ever offered in the state for a missing child. This was a move of desperation, a plea really, the kind of incentive that turns whispers into evidence. It generated a fresh wave of media attention. Tip lines lit up, hundreds of new calls were logged, but still nothing conclusive. Strike Force Roseanne had grown in both personnel and scope. Analysts pored over forensic reports, historical cases, behavioral profiling data, and vehicle movements across a wide swathe of mid-North Coast roads. They looked for patterns, outliers, individuals who may have previously offended in similar ways. One man in particular began to attract attention. His name was Frank Abbott. Abbott was a convicted pedophile who had lived in a caravan on a property in the Kendall area around the time William disappeared. His criminal history stretched back decades and included multiple charges relating to offenses against children. He had been living off-grid, mostly unnoticed, until someone tipped police off about his location. When police interviewed Abbott, he denied any involvement in William's disappearance. Yet inconsistencies in his statements and his troubling past meant that Strikeforce Roseanne kept him on their radar. In 2020, after spending time in prison for unrelated charges, he was brought back into the spotlight during a coronial inquest. But more on that later. Throughout 2016 and 2017, investigators continued to pursue various lines of inquiry. They investigated the timing of postal deliveries, garbage collection, and car sightings on Benaroon Drive. They even explored the possibility that someone had lured William toward the rear of the property, into the bushland, then taken him along one of the unofficial tracks that linked the cul-de-sac to other roads. Multiple vehicles had been spotted in the area around the time William vanished. A white station wagon, a gray sedan, a 4WD. Some were traced, ruled out, others weren't. Witnesses recalled seeing unfamiliar cars parked oddly or slowly circling, but recollections shifted over time. Details blurred. Without hard evidence, number plates, surveillance footage, DNA, speculation was all they had. At one point, a theory emerged that William may have fallen from a balcony or sustained a fatal accident on the property, and that it had been covered up. Police investigated this possibility thoroughly. They examined the structure of the house. They reviewed the testimonies of everyone present that day. But they found no blood evidence, no inconsistencies in witness accounts, no suggestion that such a scenario had occurred. Still, the internet turned. Online forums brimmed with rumors, many of them cruel and unfounded. Both William's biological and foster families became targets of suspicion, especially as their identities began to leak into public discourse. The emotional toll was enormous. William's biological mother, who had been dealing with drug dependency issues and was deemed unfit at the time to care for her son, became increasingly vocal in media appearances. She said she felt sidelined, distrusted the system, and feared that her son had been lost under state watch. Her anguish was real. So was her frustration. Meanwhile, the foster parents maintained a lower profile. Police made it clear, on multiple occasions, that they were not suspects. Still, anonymous commentators whispered doubts. The media tiptoed around the subject due to legal constraints. In 2018, almost 4 years after William's disappearance, a coronial inquest was announced by the NS Dollars Coroner's Court. This would mark a significant shift. It meant that all known evidence would be reviewed under oath. Witnesses would be compelled to testify. And for the first time, the full scale of the investigation, including its blind spots, would come into the public eye. The inquest began in March 2019, presided over by Deputy State Coroner Harriet Graham. In the courtroom, over the course of multiple hearings, police officers, family members, forensic experts, and convicted offenders were questioned in minute detail. The foster parents testified. Their recollections were consistent. They described the morning with clarity and pain. The tea on the porch, the roar of William pretending to be a tiger, the silence, the disappearance, the 10:56 a.m. 000 call. Their heartbreak was evident, their timeline unwavering. One of the more controversial aspects of the inquest came with the questioning of Frank Abbott. He was brought in under guard from prison, placed in the witness box, and asked directly about the day William disappeared. He dodged, denied, contradicted. At one point he claimed he didn't know who William Tyrrell was. At another, he said he had heard of him from the newspapers. When pressed about his location that day, his statements conflicted with known records. Still, despite deep suspicions, no direct evidence could place Abbott at the scene or link him conclusively to the disappearance. The same problem haunted every line of inquiry. There was no DNA, no fibers, no confirmed sightings, just a vortex of possible scenarios, each one as tragic and unprovable as the next. Throughout 2019 and into 2020, the coronial inquest continued in segments. Detectives admitted the investigation had experienced flaws early on, miscommunications, leads not followed swiftly enough, moments lost in the confusion of that first critical day. But by then, Strike Force Roseanne had left no stone unturned. They had executed dozens of search warrants, reviewed over 15,000 documents, taken hundreds of witness statements. Still, no body. In the midst of it all, public interest remained fierce. Australians wanted justice. They wanted closure. They wanted an ending to the sentence that had hung in the air since September 12, 2014. William Tyrrell is missing. But justice remained elusive. And then came a development that changed everything, or so it seemed. In late 2021, 7 years after the disappearance, NS Police made headlines when they returned to Kendall and launched an intensive new search, this time focused around the very property where William vanished, and the adjacent bushland. Excavators were brought in. Specialist forensics, cadaver dogs, soil sampling. They searched drains, septic systems, and a nearby creek bed. Commissioner Mick Fuller made a stunning statement. Police were working under a new theory, and they were confident the investigation was close to a breakthrough. News outlets speculated furiously. There were whispers of a narrowed suspect, an imminent arrest. And then, silence again. Weeks passed. The search yielded no remains, no weapon, no physical evidence capable of concluding the case. What had prompted the renewed search? According to sources, it was connected to fresh testimony gathered during the coronial inquest, including statements from the foster mother, whose previous comments were allegedly inconsistent on certain details. As a result, she reportedly became the focus of new inquiries, but no charges were laid. And as of early 2023, no official breakthrough was declared. The coronial inquest has yet to deliver a final finding, and so William's fate remains officially unresolved. To this day, investigators maintain that William's disappearance is likely the result of human intervention. In other words, an abduction. But without a body, without a confession, and without forensic evidence, it remains one of Australia's most painful mysteries. And the photo, that joyful image of a boy in a Spider-Man costume laughing without fear, still haunts the nation. A voiceover-ready script based solely on verified facts. 7 years. That's how long it had been since William Tyrrell vanished from a quiet home in Kendall, New South Wales, wearing his red Spider-Man costume, laughing, roaring like a tiger, and then gone. 7 years of investigations, 7 years of media headlines, 7 years of questions without answers. But in November 2021, a wave of anticipation gripped the public once again. The Nassau Police, under a newly intensified directive, launched what would become one of the most exhaustive physical searches since the immediate aftermath of William's disappearance. Bulldozers, excavators, drones, and forensic tents returned to Kendall. But this time, it wasn't the beginning. It was a recalibration, a shift in investigative direction, rooted in what police now described as new information. Strike Force Roseanne, which had been at the heart of the case since 2014, was formally replaced with a new operation, Strike Force Roseanne II. This was more than a symbolic change. It marked a new approach under the leadership of Detective Chief Superintendent Darren Bennett and the investigative direction of Detective Chief Inspector David Laidlaw. This time the search narrowed. It wasn't a region-wide scan. It wasn't broad. It was focused, targeted. A single area, the property where William was last seen, and a section of bushland behind it. Detectives made something clear in statements to the press. This was no longer just a missing persons case. They were treating it as a potential homicide. And more than that, and for the first time, the foster mother was being considered a person of interest. The country paused. For years, the foster parents had been publicly cleared. They had cooperated with police, participated in interviews, grieved in silence, protected by court orders and anonymity laws. But internal documents revealed that concerns had emerged over the years regarding inconsistencies in the foster mother's timeline. Specifically, around the very moment William supposedly vanished, police now believed it was possible, even likely, that William died as a result of an accident, and that his body had been deliberately concealed. In one of the few public statements made during the renewed search, Detective Laidlaw said, "The information that has led us to this point is specific, and we are acting on it." The public once again was torn between hope and dread. As the days stretched into weeks, the police operation became increasingly intense. Bulldozers cleared dense foliage. Specialist forensic officers sifted soil with painstaking precision. Human remains detection dogs were brought in. Small holes were bored into the earth to extract scent samples. Firefighters helped clear undergrowth and hose down search zones for trace evidence. This wasn't just procedural, it was personal. The bushland behind the Benaroon Drive property had been searched before, but not like this. Not with this level of suspicion. Not with this specific theory guiding every move. Still, police refused to confirm publicly what new evidence or testimony had driven the renewed investigation. But reporters began uncovering threads. According to leaked documents and anonymous sources, investigators had re-examined hours of recorded interviews, surveillance footage, and past witness statements. They focused heavily on a 2019 listening device placed in the foster family's car, a move sanctioned under court orders and part of a covert surveillance operation. During one of those recordings, the foster mother allegedly made remarks that caught the attention of detectives. She referenced blood in the car, questioned whether William would be found, and spoke in ways that police believed were potentially incriminating. However, these recordings, while compelling to investigators, were not confessions. They were ambiguous, subject to interpretation. Even so, they prompted a shift. Over the weeks that followed the 2021 search, news helicopters buzzed overhead. Media crews set up camps near the street. Every movement, every tarp, every shovel of earth was photographed, analyzed, and dissected on nightly news. In one specific location, near a small concrete slab at the rear of the property, police focused intently. They drilled, lifted, and dug. For days, cameras rolled as forensic teams scraped layers of soil from beneath the concrete in what appeared to be a desperate bid to recover something, anything. And then, fragments, tiny bits of red fabric. For a moment, the country held its breath. Could this be it? Could it be William's Spider-Man suit? Samples were sent to forensic labs for urgent analysis. But days later, police confirmed the fragments were not linked to William. They were not part of his clothing. The breakthrough, if it existed, would not be found here. Not yet. The disappointment was profound. But the investigators didn't stop. Over the following weeks, more than 15 tons of soil and bush debris were removed from the site. Cadaver dogs hit on several areas, prompting new digs. But again, nothing conclusively linked to William emerged. And all the while, under intense legal protection, the identity of the foster mother remained shielded. At the same time, the coronial inquest that had resumed in 2020, paused by the pandemic and ongoing investigative developments, awaited a final determination. Deputy State Coroner Harriet Graham had not yet issued formal findings. Legally, her role was not to assign guilt, but to establish facts, to determine whether William had died, and if so, how, and in what circumstances. In open court, police continued to assert that human intervention was the most probable explanation for William's disappearance. Back at the search site, one detail from the original day resurfaced: a nearby septic tank. In 2014, it had been searched early on, but only visually and from the surface. No forensic tests had been conducted inside. Now, in 2021, it was drained and fully examined. Police retrieved residue from the tank. Samples were collected. But again, no link to William. Meanwhile, former Detective Chief Inspector Gary Jubelin, who had led the original strike force Roseanne, re-entered public conversation. Jubelin had become a controversial figure in the case, widely praised for his relentless commitment, but also convicted in 2020 of illegally recording conversations during the investigation, a serious breach of surveillance laws. Jubelin claimed he had been forced out of the case for pushing too hard, and had always believed certain individuals were not properly investigated. He accused senior police leadership of undermining the operation's focus. The Dallas police, in response, stood by their actions, citing the need for legal integrity and procedural correctness. The fractures within the investigation became as public as the mystery itself. As 2022 arrived, public confidence waned. Another major search had concluded without answers. The foster mother, though not charged, was increasingly scrutinized by media, particularly after leaked court documents revealed allegations of interference with the original search timeline. Specifically, it was suggested that the 00 emergency call may have been delayed, that the account of where William was last seen may not have been accurate, that certain household actions that day were inconsistent with the normal behavior of a panicked caregiver. Still, no charges, no confirmed evidence, no body. For the public, this lack of closure grew intolerable. Opinion polarized. Some demanded arrests. Others called for a complete reinvestigation. Still others pleaded for compassion, a reminder that suspicion does not equate to guilt. Then came an explosive revelation. In late 2022, the Dallas Department of Communities and Justice filed child assault charges against the foster mother and foster father in a separate matter, not related to William but concerning a different child once in their care. The details were suppressed, but the implications were massive. For the first time, individuals tied to William's care were officially accused of criminal behavior. Though police stated the charges were not connected to the disappearance, public trust continued to erode. In the face of all this, the failed searches, the shifting focus, the legal complexities, the core truth remained unchanged. William Tyrrell was still missing. He would now be 12 years old. Too much time had passed. Faces aged, memories faded, witnesses moved away, properties were sold. Bushland grew thicker, but the question never went away. Where is William? The final days of 2022 saw yet another police statement, this time cautiously optimistic. Forensic evidence collected during the 2021-2022 search was still undergoing analysis, and detectives remained committed to pursuing every lead. But the tone was subdued. The years had taken their toll. As 2023 progressed, no new public updates were issued. The coronial inquest, technically still open, remained in limbo. Investigators were said to be preparing a final brief of evidence, but no definitive findings had yet been released. The fate of William Tyrrell continued to sit in a cloud of uncertainty, suspended between tragedy and silence. Still, the community of Kendall remembers. In a quiet corner of the town, not far from the home on Benaroon Drive, a plaque was installed by locals. It reads simply, "In memory of William Tyrrell, you will never be forgotten." By the start of 2023, the case of William Tyrrell had become far more than a missing child investigation. It had evolved, slowly, painfully, into a national reckoning, not just about what happened to a boy in a Spider-Man suit, but about the systems, the silences, and the stumbles that followed. For the public, fatigue had set in. So many press conferences, so many promises, so many leads described as critical that vanished into nothing, and still, no arrest, no conviction, no remains, no moment of finality. Inside police headquarters, however, a quiet but determined energy persisted. Strike Force Roseanne 2, now operating under the specialized oversight of the Dallas Homicide Squad, was still analyzing the evidence collected during the massive 2021-2022 search around Benaroon Drive. Every fragment of material, every fiber of soil, every recorded word gathered during covert surveillance operations was under forensic review. Much of this renewed momentum had been sparked by a fundamental shift in how detectives framed the case. It was no longer being treated as a traditional abduction by a stranger. Rather, investigators were exploring whether the crime, if there was one, may have been concealed in plain sight. This meant one thing: returning to the beginning. The first 30 minutes after William disappeared, the choices, the movements, the phone calls, the conversations, the behavior. It had all been re-examined minute by minute, frame by frame. A timeline had emerged, not just of what was said, but of what wasn't. According to official records, William had last been seen playing at the front and side yard of the property. The foster mother in interviews had described hearing him let out a tiger-like roar, part of his fantasy play, and then silence. She said she went looking, called his name, couldn't find him, then made a phone call to her husband who was at Lakewood. Then, roughly 45 minutes later, placed the emergency call to 000. But in later statements, and under pressure during the inquest, questions were raised. Had the search actually begun earlier than stated? Was the emergency call delayed? Why were neighbors not immediately informed? Why didn't the foster grandmother, who was also present, notice anything? One forensic theory suggested William may have fallen from the balcony or been injured in some unseen way, and that panic, not premeditation, led to a cover-up. But police had no blood evidence, no impact point, no witness. It remained only that, a theory. To complicate matters, recordings from a listening device planted by police inside the foster family's car came to light during the investigation. This device had captured dozens of hours of conversations over months. Most were mundane: errands, appointments, arguments, life. But some excerpts stood out. In one conversation, the foster mother reportedly said, "If his body is found, I'm going to go to jail." In another, she allegedly referenced blood being cleaned from a car. Police seized the family's vehicles, swabs were taken, chemical residue analysis was conducted. But to date, forensic evidence had not confirmed the presence of William's DNA in any of those vehicles in a way that proved foul play. Legally, the remarks on the tapes were ambiguous. They raised suspicion, but not legal certainty. In February 2023, the Nest-Dadler's Director of Public Prosecutions advised that the recordings were not sufficient to support charges. The case stalled again. Still, the foster mother remained under intense scrutiny. It was around this time that unrelated but damaging revelations surfaced publicly. In late 2022, charges were laid against both the foster mother and foster father over the alleged physical assault of another child previously in their care. The details of the charges were suppressed, but the optics were devastating. For years, the public had seen the foster family as quiet, cooperative, private individuals whose lives had been shattered by a freak disappearance. But the new charges challenged that perception, even if the allegations were unrelated to William. It also raised broader concerns about child protection oversight. William had been placed in out-of-home care by the Department of Family and Community Services, FACS, because of issues in his biological home. But now serious allegations were surfacing about the people entrusted to keep him safe. In the court of public opinion, confidence in the foster care system eroded sharply. Reporters turned to internal documents, whistleblowers, and leaked files to understand how William's care had been managed. What emerged was deeply troubling. In the months before his disappearance, William's biological family had raised concerns about the foster arrangement. They feared they were being pushed aside, that decisions about visitation, about updates about his well-being were being made without transparency. Some in the family claimed they hadn't even known where William was staying at the time he vanished. Inquiries showed that the biological parents had been dealing with drug dependency and unstable housing, which had influenced the court's decision to place William in care. However, it also revealed that their visits were limited, sometimes to 1 hour per fortnight, under supervision. They had no input on the location of his temporary stays. The trip to Kendall, to the foster grandmother's home, had not been communicated to them in advance. In a rare interview years later, William's biological mother broke down on camera, crying, "He was taken from me for safety, and then he's gone. I wasn't allowed to see him, and now I never will." Her pain echoed across the country. Meanwhile, public frustration grew over the pace and the opacity of the investigation. Why were some leads made public and others hidden? Why was the foster mother not charged if police believed her statements were inconsistent? Why had forensic material still not produced definitive results? Then came another frustrating blow. A leaked internal police report revealed that early errors had been made in the handling of the crime scene. In the critical first 24 hours, not all areas had been cordoned off. The house had not been treated as a potential crime scene until hours after the initial search began. Footprints were not preserved. Digital devices were not immediately seized. Witnesses were allowed to speak to one another. These missteps, while not uncommon in the early stages of a presumed wander-off case, became catastrophic in retrospect. They meant that critical evidence may have been missed or contaminated. Still, police refused to close the door. Even without a body, even without a suspect in custody, the case file remained open, active, and under daily review. New methods of soil testing, scent residue detection, and forensic geolocation were being applied. Some developed only recently, long after the original search. In May 2023, Strike Force Roseanne II issued a call for further witnesses, not to the day William disappeared, but to the days before and after. They believed someone, somewhere, knew something, perhaps not even realizing its significance. A sound, a vehicle, a discarded object, a comment at the pub, a photograph taken without context. Every thread was being pulled again. That same month, a new team of forensic anthropologists was brought in to reassess the viability of remains being preserved in the acidic soil of the Kendall region after 8.5 years. Their findings were sobering. Decomposition in the subtropical climate of New South Wales could be rapid and near complete in as little as 12 months. If William's body had been concealed, even shallowly, in bushland, chances of recovery were now extremely slim. Yet hope persisted, because in the world of missing children, hope, however fragile, never fully dies. Posters of William were still up, bumper stickers, social media campaigns, billboards in rural towns still carried his image. Dozens of children had been found alive years after they disappeared in other countries. J.C. Dugard in the U.S., Elizabeth Smart, Natasha Kampusch in Austria. Their cases kept hope alive. But statistically, cold reality set in. The chances of recovery after the first 48 hours? Less than 10%. After 1 year? Less than 1%. After 8 years? Nearly impossible. Still, the Nestauder police force committed itself publicly. They would never close the case until either William was found or someone was held accountable. By mid-2023, there was movement again behind the scenes. Sources confirmed that the Director of Public Prosecutions was reviewing a fresh brief from detectives, this time not centered solely on the 2021 tapes, but including new psychological profiles, behavioral analysis, and the full coronial record. The brief was, in effect, a summary of 9 years of exhaustive police work. That same period saw an internal review within FACS. The Department of Communities and Justice commissioned an independent audit of child safety oversight practices, triggered in part by public anger over the foster parent charges. While not specifically about William, the review carried his shadow. In the final quarter of 2023, yet another court order extended the suppression on identifying the foster family. The rationale was simple. No one had been charged in William's case. To name them even now could undermine any future prosecution or contaminate public perception ahead of a trial. And so, the country waited. Again. For justice. For a break. For a miracle. For a boy who disappeared with no witnesses. No screams. No camera footage. No confirmed sighting. A boy who went missing in broad daylight. In a safe town, with loving adults nearby. A boy in a superhero costume who was never seen again. As 2024 approached, one undeniable truth remained. The disappearance of William Tyrrell was not a story that ended. It was a story that waited, watched, held its breath, and refused to let go. As the case of William Tyrrell entered its 9th year, Australia found itself staring into the long, cold silence that surrounds unresolved loss. But unlike other missing person cases, this one had never truly faded. It had remained day after day like a low, humming tension beneath the skin of the country. And for those closest to it, investigators, family, legal experts, social workers, that tension was more than emotional. It was procedural, legal, systemic, personal. Because behind every headline about new search efforts or foster parent scrutiny was a labyrinth of records, mistakes, policies, and people. This wasn't just a whodunit. It was also a What went wrong? And increasingly, that question wasn't being asked just about the day William vanished, but about everything that came after. The year 2023 closed without resolution. No charges had been laid in William's disappearance. The coronial inquest remained open, its final report pending. Suppression orders continued to shield the identities of individuals directly involved, and the public, for all its heartbreak, remained in the dark on critical details. But inside police headquarters, the wheels were still turning. Detectives working under Strike Force Roseanne II were building a holistic theory of the case. That meant weaving together a narrative not only from physical evidence, which was lacking, but from behavior, language, time gaps, emotional responses, and patterns. It was an effort grounded in what's known as investigative psychology, a discipline that draws on criminology, psychology, and forensic linguistics to assess truth, deception, and probability. At the heart of that work was the idea that people's words, and their choices in moments of stress, reveal more than they intend. One area of renewed focus involved digital forensics. In the years since William's disappearance, advances in metadata analysis, deleted content recovery, and communications triangulation had transformed the landscape of cold case investigations. NSW police began reanalyzing digital records from 2014, phones, computers, tablets, cloud backups. They weren't just looking for confessions. They were looking for contradictions. What was said publicly versus privately. What was deleted versus what remained. One example involved a recovered SMS from one of the foster carers, sent hours after William vanished, that expressed frustration with media involvement. Police didn't consider the message damning, but they noted its tone. It was pragmatic, not panicked, detached. Another involved a WhatsApp chat thread that showed logistical discussions between family members on the day of the trip to Kendall, messages that appeared rushed, incomplete. While not evidence of wrongdoing, the inconsistencies deepened the uncertainty investigators faced. Could it simply be the chaos of daily life, or was something being masked? But while technology allowed police to look backward, the emotional fallout of the case was still unfolding in the present. One of the most painful developments involved the NSW's child protection system itself. In early 2024, an explosive internal report, leaked to journalists by an anonymous staffer, revealed that dozens of children in out-of-home care in New South Wales had gone missing in the past decade, and many cases had not been followed up adequately. Some children were eventually located, others were never reported missing to police at all. The William Tyrrell case, the report said, had triggered numerous procedural reforms, but those reforms were inconsistently applied. One line from the report stood out starkly. The system that was meant to protect children has repeatedly failed to identify, act on, or prevent high-risk placements. The Department of Communities and Justice issued a statement denying systemic negligence, but admitted that William's disappearance had exposed gaps in monitoring and cross-agency coordination. Those gaps weren't just bureaucratic, they were human. In mid-2024, whistleblowers from within the department gave sworn testimony, some anonymously, describing an agency overwhelmed by caseloads, under-resourced, and often pressured to prioritize placement quantity over quality. One frontline worker described a moment she'll never forget. "We were told William's foster home was one of our better placements, and he disappeared." The media seized on the story. Editorials questioned whether child welfare in NSW was structurally broken. Advocates demanded external audits, parliamentary inquiries, criminal negligence charges. But others urged caution. "Don't turn this into a blame game," they said. The real target must be the truth, not just accountability for systems, but for whoever took William from that yard on Benaroon Drive. Because that was still the question. Who took him? Or, if the leading theory now carried weight, who covered up what happened to him? In June 2024, a rare development stirred the public again. A new witness came forward, not with a memory of the day William disappeared, but with information about an alleged confession made in prison by a man previously considered a person of interest. That man's name had not been made public, and as per standard legal practice, media outlets were restricted from revealing too much. According to the informant, the man had described knowing what happened to that Spider-Man kid. He allegedly spoke of a burial, a bag, and a moment of panic. The information was immediately shared with NSW police, who confirmed they were assessing its credibility. But prison confessions, especially those years after the fact, are notoriously unreliable. Often they are the product of mental illness, manipulation, or jailhouse politics. Still, detectives were said to be taking this particular account very seriously. They returned to maps, satellite imagery, cell tower logs, re-interviewed guards, visitors, former associates of the prisoner. They conducted a low-profile search of a location he may have been referring to, but no trace of human remains was discovered. The case remained where it had always been, one step forward, one step back. Meanwhile, the foster mother, still unnamed due to court orders, continued to live under a cloud of public suspicion. Despite the lack of criminal charges relating to William's disappearance, she was already facing trial on separate child assault charges, as well as allegations of misleading police during the investigation. At one point during pretrial hearings in early 2024, her legal team argued that she had been unfairly targeted by police and the public, stating, "The media have, in effect, tried her in the court of public opinion. She deserves due process." But for many Australians, especially those who had followed the case from the beginning, sympathy had given way to exhaustion. They didn't necessarily want vengeance. They just wanted closure, to know what happened, to lay William to rest somehow. The problem was, the law doesn't operate on emotion. It needs proof. And so the Dallas Director of Public Prosecutions once again reviewed the investigative brief, now over 6,000 pages long. It included forensic reports, psychological profiles, transcripted interviews, location data, phone logs, surveillance footage, and every statement ever given by the key individuals involved. According to confidential sources within the legal community, the DPP was not satisfied that charges could be successfully prosecuted in court based on current evidence. No confession, no eyewitness, no physical remains. Still, police remained convinced they were close. One detective, speaking off record to ABC journalists, summed it up this way: "We're building a jigsaw puzzle. We're missing one piece, but we can see the picture now." It was a powerful metaphor, and a haunting one, because in that picture, if it ever comes fully into focus, is a child who has failed, not necessarily by one person, but by layers, a confluence of tragedy and silence, misjudgment and bureaucracy, grief and institutional error. As September 2024 approached, 10 full years since William Tyrrell was last seen, preparations began for what was expected to be a significant public moment. A candlelight vigil was scheduled in Kendall. Community members, former search volunteers, and journalists planned to gather on Benaroon Drive. A makeshift memorial was erected, a small plaque, photos of William, and a single red and blue Spider-Man balloon. It floated gently in the wind, tethered to a wooden fence. And across the country, stories about William's life and what little was known resurfaced again. That he loved cars, that he had a mischievous laugh, that he was energetic, affectionate, and obsessed with superheroes. He was more than a mystery. He was a boy, a child placed in care by the state, a child promised protection, a child who, in the blink of an eye, vanished, leaving behind not only a family and an investigation, but a whole nation asking itself hard questions. And perhaps the hardest one of all still remained. Was there ever a moment, just one, when the trajectory could have changed? Had someone seen something, heard something? If just one person had knocked on a door, called a tip line, checked a backyard, would William have been found? These are questions that may never be answered, but even unanswered, they demand to be asked. Because justice, even when slow, even when uncertain, requires persistence. And William Tyrrell, though gone, still speaks through the silence. 10 years. A full decade has passed since the morning of September 12, 2014, when a bright, energetic 3-year-old boy in a red Spider-Man suit ran across the front yard of his foster grandmother's house in Kendall, New South Wales, and vanished. In those 10 years, the landscape of this story has changed, not just geographically or procedurally, but nationally, emotionally, even culturally. What began as a missing child case grew into something far larger, a reflection of Australia's institutions, its media, its legal systems, and its collective conscience. In 2024, William Tyrrell's name remains synonymous with unresolved grief. But this is not just a tragedy. It is a timeline, a case study, and above all, a human story. As the 10th anniversary approached, the New South Wales Police Force released a statement reaffirming their commitment. In it, Detective Chief Inspector David Laidlaw, who had overseen recent phases of the case, said, "Our investigation is ongoing. While no charges have been laid at this stage, we continue to pursue all avenues. We believe someone in the community knows what happened to William. That person has not come forward." In a rare gesture of transparency, NS Dallas police confirmed that several individuals, including a person previously classified as a witness, were now officially considered persons of interest. But they stopped short of naming anyone, citing legal constraints and the risk of prejudicing future proceedings. The public was reminded that the $1 million reward remained active. 10 years on, that money still sits untouched. But that reward isn't just a number. It's a symbol of desperation, a plea. And so, on September 12, 2024, hundreds gathered in Kendall once more. The vigil, held at dusk, was solemn but not silent. There were candles, photos, ribbons, and flowers. Speeches were made by local leaders, community volunteers, and William's biological family, now permitted for the first time to speak publicly with fewer restrictions. His biological mother stepped forward, voice trembling, years older than the woman who lost custody of him before his disappearance. Sober, steady, scarred. "They told me he would be safe," she said. "They said he'd be looked after, that I could rebuild myself and he'd be waiting. But I never got that chance." Her voice cracked. "Please, if you know anything, say it now. Don't let another 10 years go by." Her words echoed through the crowd, through homes, through news bulletins later that night. That same week, a detailed documentary series aired across national television. Where is William Tyrrell? The series, approved by Nesedlu Police, walked viewers through every confirmed moment, every failed lead, every shift in theory. It interviewed former detectives, journalists, forensic experts, and court officials. What it could not interview, what no one ever could, was William. Because William, at the time of this writing, remains missing. Yet the case had not stood still. In the months leading up to the 10th anniversary, significant legal motions occurred behind closed doors. First, the long-delayed final report from the coronial inquest, led by Deputy State Coroner Harriet Graham, was completed in draft form. Sources confirmed that the report was over 300 pages in length, summarizing all evidence presented between 2019 and 2023. It did not name a killer. It did not declare an accident. But it did state, unequivocally, that William Tyrrell is dead. The conclusion was grounded in the timeline, the absence of verified sightings, the lack of physical remains, and the psychological improbability of a 3-year-old surviving unassisted in the bush beyond the initial hours, let alone for days. The draft findings were shared with police, legal counsel, and families. A final release to the public was scheduled for early 2025, pending the DPP's decision on whether to prosecute an active suspect. That same period saw the foster mother's separate child assault case proceed to trial. Court documents, heavily redacted, revealed that she was found guilty on multiple counts related to the mistreatment of another child in her care. The offenses were unrelated to William directly, but were considered highly relevant to ongoing investigations. The judge in sentencing remarked, "These acts show a pattern of coercive, controlling behavior. While they do not resolve the William Tyrrell case, they challenge public assumptions about care and trust." She was given a custodial sentence of 3 years, with eligibility for parole after 18 months. The verdict sent shockwaves through public opinion. For years she had been protected by anonymity laws, seen by some as a grieving foster parent, not a convicted abuser. The media, now freer to report certain details due to changes in suppression orders, began referring to her only by initials. Her face, though still blurred, became familiar. The scrutiny grew more intense. Yet once again, no charges for William's disappearance. Not yet. But the mood within Strikeforce Roseanne 2 had changed. Detectives now had more than a theory. They had precedent, testimony, a conviction on record, and they had one more tool in their arsenal: time. Because the passage of time, while often cruel to investigations, can also be an ally. It can weaken loyalties. It can shake secrets loose. And that's precisely what police hoped for. Throughout late 2024, a renewed public campaign was launched under the banner, "It's not too late to tell the truth." Bus stops, social media, TV ads, all carried William's smiling face, digitally aged by 10 years to show what he might look like now, older, more mature, but still unmistakably him. The campaign didn't just aim for tips, it aimed for conscience. And slowly it began to work. According to Nestal's police, more than 140 new tips were received in the first 6 weeks. Most were quickly ruled out, but 7 were deemed credible enough to warrant field investigation. These included second-hand accounts of strange conversations, delayed memories of sightings, and, in one case, an anonymous letter mailed to a regional police station. The letter was handwritten. It referenced a shed and a bad mistake. The author claimed no personal involvement but said they had been holding something for years and feared legal consequences. The letter was postmarked in a rural area of New South Wales. Detectives traveled there, canvassed neighborhoods, traced handwriting samples from local records, and collected DNA from the envelope. The results were inconclusive, but not dismissed. As of early 2025, the tip remains under active review. Meanwhile, the final recommendation from the coronial inquest was quietly delivered to the Attorney General's office. It urged 2 actions: that William Tyrrell's status be officially changed from missing person to suspected homicide victim, that the Nassau Parliament commission an external review into historical practices within the Department of Communities and Justice relating to the placement and monitoring of children in state care. Both recommendations are under consideration. So what does that mean now? It means that William's case is no longer just a mystery. It is now a permanent part of Australian legal and social history, a chapter that no longer asks if something went wrong, but how many things did. And still, in a quiet room somewhere, one detective likely stares at a pinboard. There are photos, dates, maps, transcripts. Somewhere in that room is the name of a person they believe knows the truth, but law requires proof, and so they wait for a witness, for a confession, for a moment that turns the silence into justice. 10 years on, the public is older. The bushland in Kendall is thicker. William's toys are long gone. His face is a photo on a wall, but his name has not faded, because Australia doesn't forget, because there is still a mother who wonders if she might have gotten clean in time. There is still a town that remembers helicopters overhead and search parties with torches in the rain. And there is still a country that understands now what it didn't fully grasp in 2014, that evil can be quiet, that harm can wear a kind face, that not all monsters hide in the shadows. Some walk in daylight, past tea mugs and smiling cameras. And so the question, the final question, remains not only for the courts and the coroner, but for every citizen who once heard the name William Tyrrell and didn't look away. Do you know something? Because someone does, and someone someday may finally speak. When they do, that will be the moment William comes home.